All
Hi
right.
guys.
Wait, I don't know
Oh,
if we're, are we?
I don't know if we're live.
Okay. You know my pet peeve about people saying that they're live. They're like, oh, we're live. And you're like, you're an idiot because that's why it says live up there. But that's okay. Anyway.
Okay.
So now.
Welcome to our live. Jacob hates it, and we've just said it like 4 times.
Okay, go ahead. So anyway, look, bottom line is we want to just jump right into it because, who's watching Facebook in the middle of the day? Except everybody probably.
Whoever
Whoever is, thank you for being
whoever is
here.
not, you can watch the replay.
Right. So we wanted to discuss the idea of blame and where it plays into relationships. Hey, Neely, good to see you.
Welcome, Neely. We're so excited you're here.
So what role does blame play in relationships, and how do you really move past that? So tell us a little bit about where it comes from and your thoughts.
Okay, so I think we all know what blame is, right? We see our kids running around the house screaming at each other, and we know there's no reason like one kid whacked the other kid without some prior action happening, right? There was usually something that provoked that happening. So we want to just highlight the fact that in a marriage, in a relationship, there's similar things happen. That usually a reaction or a lack of doing something is not just an isolated event happening in a vacuum, but it's really as a result, a reaction to something the other person did.
Right. So just to put it candidly, what it sounds like my wife is saying, and please tell me if
Okay.
that's the case, is that we kind of sit in real time looking at the relationship of the other person, what the other person's doing, and why that bothers us. And I think what you're starting off is by saying that as soon as you see something that is bothering you, before you just identify what they're doing and get upset about it, ask yourself, what is it that created this outcome? What did I do that created this outcome? What did I do to create the person doing this? So you right away detach from the actual thing that happened,
Right.
and start to get curious, why did they do this kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's difficult, I would say, to have that word in like curiosity. Wouldn't you say?
Right.
I think that getting to that point of curiosity, because usually we're so emotionally entangled in the situation, and we have this feeling like we're being like self-righteous, right? A lot of times when we get into that habit of blaming our spouse, if that happens either internally, like you're brewing on the inside, or if it just happens, if it all of a sudden bubbles over and it comes out as criticism or negativity, that's very I don't know, very easily seen in the relationship. So, but usually what that is caused, that's what was I saying? I forgot.
I don't know, but I think suffice to say that we see oftentimes in any kind of partner relationship that what would be the greatest thing possible, again, and I see this across a lot of different areas, is as you get to know yourself better and knowing your own patterns and your own habits, realizing that if you can even identify that to your partner, again, like we talked about, and Brittany asked that great question about, if you have different ways of processing stuff. So our classic thing is that I will talk through a problem and you will go to bed and get over it. And so I would lay there seething.
Right.
Or
We had this problem come up a
like
lot.
like
in our
over a
marriage.
decade in
Yeah.
a marriage. Right. Go ahead and tell people
Well,
about that.
usually what would happen is if we got into a disagreement or an argument, Jacob would always want to work it out. And the more that he tried to work it out, the more defensive and worked up and angry I would get. Because
also 'cause
I
I'm trying
just
to work it
wanted
out
my
from the-
space.
Right, and also I'm trying to work it out from the same negative, frustrated place that created the problem in the first place. I didn't create any space,
Right.
so I was just like, I was still bringing all of the same emotional arousal, baggage, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it, to said problem.
Yes. So, exactly. So
So how do you deal with it if you have a spouse
Yeah.
that has and we all have things to work on.
and I think and it could be in so many different areas of our lives, because usually, I mean, it's two people with two completely different backgrounds, two ways of looking at the world, two family histories, the way that they saw things happening in. Something is exciting going on behind us, but anyways, so two people who have completely different experiences and backgrounds, so obviously they're gonna come at a problem with different expectations of how it should be solved.
And also, again, and these are I have this idea about identifying dragons, right? That oftentimes we like try to make our problems smaller than they actually are, right? And reality is like they're big problems for us. So the fact, like I had a clients I was working with, which were two siblings that were running a business together, and just getting them on the same page, even though they've been in business for like, they've worked together their whole lives and they've been in business together, running the company for decades. Just get them to sit down and have a meeting. So it seems like, oh, that's such a basic thing, but for them, they hadn't done it in over a decade.
Yeah.
You know?
And also, I mean, obviously, when you sit down for that, quote unquote meeting, if it is between partners, it's doing it in a place where you're both emotionally neutral,
Well,
right?
one second before we even go, I think that just the 2 points before we go to the tactical is one,
Yeah.
you want to be able to have the clarity to realize that the small difficulties that you might have are actually much bigger than you might think. And the fact that maybe if you guys can't communicate well, like, it's just communicating with your spouse. It's like, no, that's really hard for you if you can't do it effectively. And the other piece I think that's super important is to realize that, like,
Well, I think a lot of people think that communication is like the biggest part of a relationship. So what do you mean by that?
well, I no, I'm saying like people kind of underestimate how difficult a lot of these things are. It's like if you run a
Oh.
business together, you think that you should be able to have meetings. And so you're like, oh, what's wrong with me? And you go all judgmental. But the reality is you have to start where you are
Yeah.
and realize like, okay, so even though like we're doing something that you think would be basic, it's like you haven't done it for 10 years, right? That's a very
Yeah.
big deal. That's really impressive.
Right. Just I mean, I guess what you're saying is just being very honest about wherever you are and wherever you may be. There's no judgment around it. It's acknowledging where you are and just being okay with that.
Right. I think what's also super important here is to
Hi, Stephanie. Welcome.
is to appreciate. I don't know, like, do you whatever.
Yeah, why not?
So the other thing that's super difficult and important to appreciate is that we're dealing with very important things in our lives. So when we're arguing with our spouses, when we're talking with our spouses, dealing with kids, dealing with financing, dealing with like marriage, sex, like any of these things that are like what married people talk about. So like the level of buy-in is so high because we're so personally invested. And so oftentimes people think, oh, it's just a conference. Like again, we talk about stuff we don't care about with our friends, stuff like that. It doesn't really matter. But like usually the stuff you're talking about with your spouse is like super emotionally triggering to you. And so therefore also it's very easy to just jump into the place of like, what the F is wrong with you? Because I'm so emotionally invested in the outcome.
For sure. Right, because or you're saying like, let's say it's financial, something regarding finances. So that's not just a conversation. That's like an everyday. What are you doing for dinner or whatever.
Right. No, 100%. I think that's very important. So piece number one is to appreciate just how difficult it is to be able to actually be able to. Well, I think piece number one, which Julie said, was that you have to realize that when you're living in real time in a relationship, so when you're seeing your spouse do something that's bothering you, to create the distance to ask, what did I do, or what were they responding to that created this action? So to right away create space between those two things. Secondly, be more okay with where you are. If you're blaming all the time, maybe because you're not having open communication, so then it's like, okay, slow down. Let's just try to get on the same page. Maybe have a conversation on values, like maybe 10 minutes a week or maybe 10 minutes a month, something like that. And I think the third piece that you were saying was, or that I was bringing up, was this idea that, when you are talking about emotionally triggering, maybe find things that you guys can talk about that are not so emotionally triggering. Because you're talking about kids, sex, or money, or ego, or whatever it might be, that's always going to like cut to the core of a person. So maybe you guys should try to interact about stuff that doesn't really matter, just so you get used to the back and forth of talking about
and
relationships.
so you get into a pattern or a habit of just having positive interactions.
Right.
I would say that's a really important piece of the piece before the blame. Like we were talking about this before. It's like how, in terms of understanding what the idea of blame, like where does it start popping up? Because usually at the beginning of a relationship, it's all like fine and dandy, and then it's not till later on that blame starts showing up. So where does it come from?
The word resentment pops into my mind. When you start to harbor resentment, then it's much easier to blame, right? So like one of our little kids was always talking about how her life was so much better before her little sister was born, and so she's like bearing this like ongoing resentment for the fact that her sister was born to take away her status as kind of like the beloved child, and obviously she blames a lot because she's deeply already in a place of being resentful and upset. So I think that when you find yourself blaming your spouse more and more, you might have to check. And again, this is also hard because it's like, what does it mean I resent my spouse? Because that carries with it all these other values about what a crappy spouse you might be if you're sitting around resenting your husband or your wife. But the truth is, if you find yourself blaming, it's probably because there's that underlying level of resentment that you're frustrated that they aren't who you thought that they were or who you want them to be.
And I would say that if you do find yourself in that place of resentment, one thing to be able to do from that is just saying, what are your needs that are not being met? and being really coming becoming really honest
You're saying
about
to ask this or to think this?
first of all think this to yourself. Like usually resentment comes, let's say I'm really angry with you, like the whole the such a popular, it's like, oh, he didn't pick up his socks, he doesn't put the toilet seat down, right? All these things are very superfluous or like superficial, but underneath it all is like, is that coming from a deeper feeling? Is that coming from a core feeling of he's not paying attention to me, or I tell him something's important to me and he doesn't care?
Right. So then, how would you
So I
fix
would
that?
say that, so when you have that, it's like, first of all, what the specific situation is, it an isolated situation? Is it really as simple as he didn't take out the trash, or she didn't pick up my dry cleaning, or whatever, whatever is it? Look at the situation. Is it that isolated situation, or is there a deeper, more core feeling involved, or more core feeling that the other person is not meeting your needs? That's number one.
That Yeah, I think that's interesting.
and
Yeah, keep going.
and then what I would go from there is, so is it that other person's responsibility to meet that need, or is it perhaps is it something that you can actually fulfill for yourself?
And
Is there a way to do it? I mean,
you're saying like picking up your own,
picking
pick up the freaking socks on the floor if they bother you
yes,
so
pick
much.
up the socks. Is the relationship more important? Is the peace in the home, the harmony within your relationship more important than the specific act of picking up socks? Because a lot of times a person isn't intentionally doing things to bother you. It could just be that they're just a messy person, that there's no inherent, they don't have an inherent intention of showing you that they don't love you, or they don't care about you, or your needs are not important, because they're displaying or exhibiting this habit.
Right. And I think also trying to figure out, and that's that idea about judging the person favorably, is it's like maybe they just dropped their socks on the floor and they didn't think about you at all. And it doesn't mean they don't care about you. It just means they have other shit going on, right? I said a bad word. Apologize. Is what it is. But I think that idea is absolutely crucial in the sense that we are living like in our own little ego bubble things where it's all about us. And as soon as you pop out of that, like when you would have situations where, I don't know, like I think as we've done a lot of self work, and you've done a lot of work and I've done a lot of work, I think part of where I saw my work working, so to speak, is that I started to say maybe what you're doing has nothing to do with me, and it never had anything to do with me, and it was you trying to get certain needs met. And as soon as I did that, it was a lot less about blaming. And again, it's still like hurt,
But you could also,
right?
be there for me a lot more when you realize it's not really about you, you know?
Well, I think that right. That's
Because when you feel like it's about you,
then you're actually
let's say,
committing
like, when I, like, what is, if I said to you, like, what's wrong with you, what's your problem, like, you can't just, like, put the toilet seat down, like, and then I put it on you, like it's like a trait, like it's you as a person, like there's something wrong with you, versus if you can see it maybe,
or like I was doing it to you, like I was doing it
right,
to you.
you were doing it to me, right? And so if I can, both of, let's say I have that reaction, let's say I say, like, I say something that's not nice to you, like, why would you do that? It's just, it's a very critical comment, and a way to interact within the relationship. So if I said that to you, so again, are you gonna, so you could come from a place like you're blaming me, like, well, it's all her fault, the way she speaks to me is so disrespectful, it's not how you treat someone, so you could blame me for that. Or you could say, like, that's one way to look at it. Or you could say, you know what, she's overwhelmed, or she, like, there's something else, it's not because I hate you that I'm saying this in this way, it's something in me.
And also realizing that perhaps what I perceived as less of a, I mean, that's always, we'll get to this in another conversation, but as a person tries to navigate like sexuality in a relationship, so also having these kinds of discussions about what are the definitions and what are the boundaries and limits about what people are allowed to do. And so very often what happens is one person might do something that they don't think is a bad thing, and then the other person would be very offended about it, right? And so what that usually indicates is just that there was a difference in values, there was a difference in boundaries that weren't adequately communicated and agreed upon in the beginning. And so I think that that's the same thing, is it's like, again, we're using the seat up bathroom example, which is again, I'm not sure what that's indicative of, except that maybe you're trying to tell me something. I'm not sure. I didn't.
Actually, you're very good at that, so
That's what I
it's all
thought.
good.
That's what I thought. But I think that what that symbolizes is if I would leave the toilet seat up, and then Julie be like, "Oh, what the hell?" So what that would essentially create is, for me, again, going back to that observing place, as opposed to a blaming place of, oh wow, her boundaries are in a different place than my boundaries are, because if I would have seen that it would be that kind of a moral affront to you, I would have been much more careful doing it. Does that
Right,
make
but
sense?
I'm talking more about things that are very chronic. Like if you knew this bothered me so badly and you still did it, you could, because then I would be more prone to say he doesn't care about me.
We're about to get to probably the most. This is the most. For all 10 billion people watching. First of all, I feel a
And
tremendous.
by the way, if whoever
I feel
is
so much
watching and you have comments or questions, just please pop
I
them
feel
in
so
the
much
chat.
performance anxiety. You're right. This is so good for me. Like I feel great because I feel very uncomfortable. But I think that the piece that's really crucial is this idea that we talk about adult and child communication, right? The kids just sort of expect everyone to figure out what the hell they're thinking and then to take action on that, and they're angry, right? And again, as grown-ups, we do that all the time. It's like you come home sulking and you just expect the person to be like, oh, how was your day? Or they don't notice, like literally I have well, we'll leave details like fuzzy, but someone was deeply offended because their spouse didn't do something that they wanted their spouse to do. And the spouse, I just said, well, did you ask? And the person said, no, I want him to know what I wanted. And we all do that so often. And it's just like, well, that's a very childlike way of interacting. Again, not judging it all. It just, that's how kids are. The baby just sits and cries. A lot of times the baby doesn't know what the hell's wrong with it, right? Now, on the flip side, an adult, this is where Brene Brown comes in with this radical vulnerability idea, is when you actually have something you want and you can articulate it and you know the other person could give it to you or not, that's called vulnerability. So again, the toilet seat being up and you yelling at me about it, not that this, again, I don't think this actually happened, could be it did, right? You could just say, do you mind putting a toilet seat down? Again, this could be a dragon, right? It might be like, I really don't think about it. I really don't like to do it. So I could go back and say, I'll try, but it's very hard. Whereas for you, it's just like, well, not a big deal. Why can't you just do it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think it comes back to that fundamental question of, are you able to know what you need? Are you able to articulate what you need? And if you notice the other person...
And are you able to actually just do it for yourself, if possible? Because I think that's always should be the first best option. Because then you take a lot of expectation and pressure off your spouse, and you can actually focus on the things that matter. When you really boil it down, I think, shared values, making sure that your actions are in line with your values, that's something important. That's something to argue about. Who's taking out the trash, or who's making the dinner? At the end of the day, it's not.
It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't.
Right, but these little things become the big things because
yeah.
people don't talk about the actual big things that matter. Which is, again, if you feel that my needs aren't being met, and I can just say that flat out, as opposed to getting mad about the dinner or something like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about emotional needs not
right.
being met instead of the stupid stuff. So how do you meet emotional needs of your spouse?
Well, first of all, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What were you saying?
Okay, so I was thinking about this, and I think I got this from the Gottman's,
yeah.
John Gottman's book. But the idea of that the relationship, it's like a bank account.
Yeah.
And I think so the idea behind that is that you're either making deposits into the account or withdrawals from the account. And so when you're giving compliments, when you're spending good quality time together, when you're respecting, admiring your spouse, when your spouse is, it could be even, obviously it could be doing the love language things that they appreciate and they love. Are you giving them gifts? Are you giving them, quality time together? All of those things. So all those things are depositing money and love into your account. But once you start being critical, or once the space becomes bigger between you, and there's not an overlap between you're not sharing your lives together, all those things take a big toll and are withdrawals from the account.
Yes. Was that you were gonna?
Yeah. So I'm saying, I'm just. What were we talking?
I don't know.
We forgot already.
I think what we were trying to do is you asked how do you meet the emotional needs of your spouse. I think the
Oh,
first
right. So when you are meeting the emotional needs, then you're depositing massive amounts, not just pennies and quarters. Those are like big bucks. Those are dollars and tons. And at the end of the day, you're when the toilet seat is left up, like today, like if the toilet seat is left up, it doesn't bother me because there's so much like emotional wealth in our account.
remember, yeah. I mean that's
But there was, I mean, just to be frank, you guys, like there was a time when we were completely depleted. I mean, we had no savings. We were like in, I
no
mean,
savings. We were like,
I was saying we're in massive debt in our emotional account.
oh, I thought you were talking about our physical account. That's it.
Both.
Oh, that's awkward. Okay, good times. Anyway,
Whatever.
so I think the other thing that's super interesting about what you said is how do you heal the emotional needs of your spouse? I think first of all, most people do not heal their own emotional needs, and they expect their spouse to do that, and that's a big red flag right there. So if that's what you're doing, stop doing that. And if you don't feel like you are fulfilled, but you're just kind of wandering in a vacuous mess through your house, expecting someone else, your wife, your kids, to fill that need, the people you employ, it's a complete reverse of what real leadership is. Is like you're supposed to be generating support for other people, not sucking support in. And if you're generating enough of that, oh, that's actually what you said, exactly right. If you're generating enough of that stuff, people will be much more motivated to step in and to help you when you need it, especially if you can ask for it. But the first step is like heal yourself, like go on your own journey of healing, and then once you've done that, then you can sort of figure out, again, it's that same thing. We have this thing where people will want to work with us, and they'll always be like, well, what do you need? And we're like, well, what can you do? And they're like, well, tell us what you need. And it's like, no, just tell us what you can do, and then we'll figure out if we need that or not. And also, if we want to hire you for that or not, if that makes sense. And the same thing's very true in marriage. Wow, that's such a deep idea, right? Where like you show up and you're like, heal me, or fix me, and then
That's what I said to you a couple nights ago.
I
I'm like,
missed it.
make me feel better. How many times do you?
Yeah,
like,
you say something like that. I don't know what to do.
I do say
I don't know
that.
what to do. I just hold her. But like,
and
I don't know.
I think that's what I need at that moment is just a reassurance. Even though at the
That's
end of the
such-
day, you can't really make me feel better, but just knowing that you're there, knowing that you're present, and knowing that you're willing to be in my darkness with me, that I think is. I think that's what I
legitimately,
mean
this
by
is
that.
actually really good for our marriage, I think, frankly. Because like when you say make me feel better, I feel extremely detached from you.
Really?
Yeah, totally. Because again, it's a very sort of like non-clear place for me. Where
Because you don't like that. I think that's.
I hate that.
Yeah, you don't like not being able to have a solution to problems.
Well, I also, yeah, it's just like, saying,
or
could
you don't
hold
like
me
it
is-
when I'm not strong. What is it?
I don't like, well, candidly, thank
This
you.
is a lot of
We'll just
honesty.
turn off the camera now. No, it is very hard for me when you're not strong. It is very hard for me when you feel out of alignment, and then in a lot of ways it makes me question my own ability to be strong and have and be successful, because again, this is a different topic, but
But
it's like
that's-
I
I'm
feel like I have
saying
to
it's
dim my
interesting,
light
like-
in a lot of ways when you're in those places, because I feel
But
like
I would.
ahead.
Okay. No, it's interesting. I would say that in those places, I think it's not so much about. It's like if you're allowing me to show up as I am, so that makes me feel safe.
totally.
You know what I'm saying?
And I totally have
so
the bandwidth
and
for
so
that.
you're what?
I totally have the bandwidth for
You
that.
do?
Yeah,
Because you're saying that makes you feel like you have to dim your
but
light.
but I still do it, because like at the end of the day,
But
it's
is
just,
it possible to like not dim your light and still have that space?
I think so. I think, but I also think that like at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. We just did this. Not that I do this very well, but I do it from time to time, and I call everyone's attention to it when I do it. It's like when I can detach and actually be doing what you need at that time. I don't care about the other side of things.
Okay, but I want to just specify. You don't mean like detach, like emotionally detach from me. You mean
No,
like
I'm detaching from my own need to like conquer.
you're detaching from your like
Male
the
energy,
ego
thing.
the ego
Yeah.
to like
to slow down and to be with
have
you.
everything be okay.
Yeah,
or
and like who
whatever.
cares, right? At the end of the day, that's
Interesting.
that idea. So practical takeaways. I think, could you just talk about what we have going on? I think this is a good first start, and I feel
Yeah.
somewhat depleted by. Go ahead.
So I hope this was helpful. I think that the idea,
It's good for me. I
you know,
enjoyed
being able to again come from that place of, oh, the last thing I wanted to say is like, who comes first? Because a lot of times people say like, well, I'm not going to do this if they don't do this.
Oh,
Like they
yeah,
think that
sure.
you have to solve the problem together, and who we that is a struggle between people. It's like who's gonna step down first, or who's this idea of what Brittany asked on the questions about who wins, quote unquote, if someone is if one person wants it this way and the other person wants it that way, so who, quote unquote, wins, and who what would you say to
I
that?
say let it all go. It's not about winning. I,
Right.
you
That's, I
know,
think, an important point, is that the idea, if you do blame your spouse for something, let's say they legitimately did something wrong, they made a terrible investment and now you've lost a ton of money. They were the one who made that decision and they did that mistake. But if you're going to blame them, it's like you're not winning by blaming.
right.
So I think that that's a really important point, is to look at it like, what am I I'm not only losing the money in that case. Like, I'm not only losing the money that we worked hard for as a couple together, I'm also losing the relationship. I'm losing the emotional connection that I have with my spouse,
Oh,
and
that's
this is the point where they actually need it the most.
right. That money analogy where it's like, if I spent the money that I have to go, even if I don't want to go anymore. And it's like, no, the money's already spent. Now you figure out whether or not you want to like ruin your evening also on the tickets that you spent that you don't want to go anymore. And that's true. It's like, do you want to keep adding on to the trauma?
Yeah.
Or do you
Or are
want
you
to
gonna
just say you want to make peace with it? I also think it's just like, at the end of the day, we shouldn't be so attached to any of our own things that we can't make room. We can't make room for our spouse and what they care about. On the flip side, as the spouse who, quote, might be getting their way because the other side's yielding, like, appreciate that maybe you will have to do it alone for a little bit. It's like, if
Yeah,
you have a
for
certain
sure.
input with the kids, don't then say, okay, well, we're going to use my strategy and therefore you have to do it. Be like, okay, so
Right.
you'll figure it out.
I
Like,
think that any exact I would say I
if
would
you listen to
agree.
that will save you like 10 years
No,
of struggle, because we
I
totally did that
I
for
would
like 10
agree with you.
years.
Is that, like, you really can't expect your spouse to be the first one to yield first. You just have to go on your way. And there's an amazing thing about energy, is that it doesn't just stay within you. Like, it's always
Moving.
exuding out of you, and yes, energy is always moving, and so your spouse will definitely pick up on the movement that you're making, if it's positive and you're not coming at it from a place of blame.
Love it. Okay,
Anyway,
tell people.
so we yeah, no, that's it. And we're really excited. We are launching a new program, which is starting in January, for couples to really work on some of these issues and many, many more.
This is, again, there are plenty of people out there that are going to be like, oh, we have the most perfect marriage. Like, that's not this course. This isn't for you. If you want to find one of those courses, it's fantastic. And I encourage you, and I'm sure it's going to help your marriage a lot. I think we're trying to go from a different perspective of just being real
Yeah.
and not being the superheroes or the stages on the stage, sages on the stage, but we'll be the elf on the shelf,
Mensch on the bench.
the, the B word in the ditch. All right. Anyway, thank you very much. And,
Reach out to us. We're really excited to hear your comments and questions.
thank you.
Bye, guys.